Stop, look, feel. Art speaks. You listen. Something awakens. Have you ever stood before a painting and felt something stir deep within you? A recognition so profound, so mysterious, so utterly complete that it seemed to bypass your conscious mind entirely? Of course you have. And in that moment, what you experienced wasn't mere aesthetic appreciation. It wasn't intellectual analysis. It wasn't even emotional response in the ordinary sense. It was the awakening of your unconscious mind through the power of visual symbols. The great Carl Jung, revolutionary psychologist, explorer of the human soul, pioneer of the depths, discovered something extraordinary about art's effect on our psyche. He found that certain images speak to all of us at a primal level, beyond culture, beyond time, beyond conscious thought. These symbols, these visual keys to our inner world, form the hidden, sacred, eternal language of our collective unconscious, and they reveal themselves most powerfully through the colors, forms, and mysterious images of visual art. Section 1. The Awakening Gateway. Today we'll journey deep beneath the surface of artistic symbols, uncovering their profound psychological significance and life-changing transformative power. You'll discover how understanding these symbols can unlock hidden dimensions of your own consciousness, reveal aspects of yourself you never knew existed, and transform your relationship with both art and life itself. When you truly see the symbolism in art, you begin to see yourself reflected in ways both mysterious and illuminating. You recognize the hero, the shadow, the divine within yourself mirrored in pigment and form. And that's merely our first step into this fascinating territory. Because what Jung discovered about abstract art and its connection to our deepest desires will fundamentally shake the foundations of how you understand human creativity, artistic expression, and the very nature of consciousness itself. Section 2. Art. The symbolic language of the unconscious. Art is truth. Art is revelation. Art is the unconscious made visible. Long before psychology existed as a discipline, artists were instinctively tapping into and expressing the symbolic language of the soul. They knew something. They felt something. They expressed something that went far beyond mere decoration or entertainment. Jung recognized this profound connection when he wrote with penetrating insight. The artist is not a person endowed with free will who seeks his own ends, but one who allows art to realize its purposes through him. Simple words. Revolutionary truth. Profound implications. The artist becomes a vessel, a channel, a sacred conduit, allowing images from the collective unconscious to flow into visual form. This explains why certain symbols appear repeatedly across cultures and throughout history. The circle, the cross, the tree of life, the divine mother, the hero's eternal struggle. These aren't merely decorative elements or cultural coincidences. They are powerful archetypes, living symbols, universal patterns emerging from our shared psychic heritage. Consider the primal art created at the dawn of human civilization. The cave paintings of Lascaux, created over 17,000 years ago, still speak to us today despite the vast temporal distance between us and those ancient artists. Their images of animals, handprints, and mysterious geometric forms resonate in our modern psyches because they connect to something timeless, eternal, and utterly essential within us all. The same archetypal patterns, still active, still alive, still speaking. And here's where it gets truly fascinating, where Jung's discovery becomes absolutely revolutionary. When people create art spontaneously, without conscious planning, without intellectual interference, without cultural conditioning, the resulting images often contain universal symbolic patterns they couldn't possibly have known through education or exposure. A patient with no knowledge of ancient symbolism might spontaneously create a mandala pattern identical to those used in Tibetan meditation practices for thousands of years. A child with no religious training might draw images that perfectly match medieval depictions of spiritual transformation. An adult in psychological crisis might paint symbols that appear in shamanic traditions across the globe. This is because the unconscious speaks in symbols. It communicates through images. It condenses complex psychological meaning into visual form. A simple circle isn't just a geometric shape. It can represent wholeness, the self, eternity, the cosmic order, the cycle of life, the unity of all existence. A snake can embody transformation, healing, primordial energy, the integration of opposites, death and rebirth. the wisdom of the earth itself. When Jung began his own psychological journey into the unconscious during his profound confrontation with the depths, he didn't just write about his discoveries. He painted them, he drew them, he gave them visual form. His famous Red Book contains stunning mandala images and symbolic figures that emerged spontaneously during periods of active imagination. For Jung, creating visual art wasn't merely therapeutic. It was revelatory, transformational, essential, a direct encounter with the collective unconscious. "My hands," Jung wrote with wonder, "have often done things that my head did not know." Profound insight, revolutionary understanding, life-changing recognition. This reveals how creating art can bypass our conscious filters, circumvent our mental defenses, and allow deeper truths to emerge. Truths our rational minds might otherwise reject, dismiss, or fail to recognize entirely. The relationship between art and the unconscious works in both directions, a continuous dialogue, an eternal conversation, a sacred exchange. Not only does the unconscious express itself through art, but engaging with symbolic art activates, influences, and transforms our unconscious in return. When you stand before a powerful painting or sculpture, it doesn't just enter your conscious awareness, it penetrates deeper. It resonates with and awakens corresponding symbolic patterns in your own psyche. It speaks to parts of you that have been waiting, listening, hoping for recognition. This explains why art can move us so deeply, why it can trigger profound emotional responses, why it can catalyze sudden insights, why it can create transformative experiences that change the course of our lives. When a work of art connects with you at this level, it's not just aesthetic appreciation. It's a moment of recognition between your personal unconscious and the symbolic content embodied in the artwork. It's a meeting, a dialogue, a sacred encounter. Think about your own experience with art right now. What images consistently draw you in? What symbols appear repeatedly in the art that moves you most deeply? What paintings, sculptures, or photographs have stayed with you over the years, returning to your memory again and again? This isn't random aesthetic preference. It's your unconscious mind recognizing itself in external form. It's responding to symbolic patterns that correspond to your own inner landscape, your personal journey, your deepest needs and longings. Artists throughout history have understood this intuitively. The Surrealists explicitly sought to bring unconscious content into their work, using techniques like automatic drawing to bypass conscious control. Jackson Pollock described his process as getting acquainted with what the paint wants to do, allowing unconscious forces to guide his hand rather than imposing conscious direction. Contemporary art therapists build on this understanding, using the creation of visual images as a way to access and work with unconscious material. The resulting artwork provides a symbolic bridge between conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche, allowing for dialogue, integration, and healing. As we move forward in our exploration, I invite you to notice which artistic symbols activate something within you. Your response isn't just personal taste, it's a key to understanding your own psychic structure. It reveals which archetypal patterns are most active in your life, which aspects of your unconscious are seeking expression, recognition, integration, and, most importantly, recognize that creating art, even simple drawings, collages, arrangements of objects, or spontaneous marks on paper, can be a powerful way to engage with your own unconscious. You don't need technical skill or formal training. The symbolic value of art has nothing to do with technical perfection and everything to do with authentic expression of inner content. The unconscious is always speaking in images. Art gives those images form. And when we engage with these forms, whether creating them or contemplating them, we enter into conversation with the deepest, most essential, most transformative layers of the psyche. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. And here's what most people never realize. And this brings us to Jung's most captivating insight about how these symbols haven't remained static throughout history. Section 3. The Journey of Symbols Through Art History. Throughout human history, artists have been the sacred keepers, the mystic channels, the inspired vessels of our collective symbolic language, preserving it, transforming it, evolving it through shifting times and diverse cultures. 3 profound truths emerge from this eternal journey. First, symbols persist. Second, symbols transform. Third, symbols reveal the evolution of consciousness itself. From the geometric precision of Egyptian hieroglyphs to the transcendent light in Renaissance religious paintings, from primal tribal masks to revolutionary abstract expressionism, each artistic tradition carries forward the eternal conversation between consciousness and the deeper, hidden, mysterious realms of the psyche. Observe, if you will, how certain symbols persist across millennia, speaking to something fundamental, essential, unchanging in our shared human experience. The spiral, ancient symbol of evolution and cyclic renewal, appears in Celtic stone carvings, winds through Native American pottery, swirls dramatically in Van Gogh's night skies, and emerges in contemporary digital art. This persistent pattern reveals our deep recognition of life's spiraling journey, the cosmic motion that governs galaxies and the unfurling of a fern frond, the cycles of death and rebirth that define all existence. The tree, rooted in earth yet reaching toward heaven, stands as a bridge between worlds in Norse mythology, appears as the tree of life in Kabbalah, and emerges transformed but recognizable in Mondrian's geometric abstractions. It speaks to our understanding of growth, connection, and the integration of opposing forces, the marriage of earth and sky, matter and spirit, human and divine. The divine feminine, manifested as Venus figures, Madonna icons, goddess sculptures, and abstract curves of creation, reveals our enduring relationship with the feminine principles of nurturing, intuition, receptivity, and regenerative power. What makes this journey through art history so mesmerizing isn't just the continuity of symbols, but their profound transformation. As human consciousness evolves, so too do our symbolic expressions. The ancient sun deity becomes the golden halo behind a saint's head, which later transforms into the radiant abstraction of a Rothko canvas. Different forms, same archetypal energy pulsing through time. Consider this extraordinary example. The labyrinth symbol appears in ancient Cretan palaces, medieval cathedral floors, Native American petroglyphs, and contemporary land art installations. Each culture expresses the same archetypal pattern: the journey inward, the path of transformation, the quest for the center. Yet each gives it unique cultural form. I wonder, which period of art history resonates most deeply with you? The mythological richness of classical art with its gods and heroes? The emotional intensity of Expressionism with its raw psychological revelation? The cosmic explorations of abstract art with its pure, symbolic language? Your answer reveals which collective symbols most powerfully activate your own unconscious depths. As you reflect on this question, you may notice images appearing spontaneously in your mind, fragments of artwork that have imprinted themselves upon your memory. These aren't random recollections. They're vital clues, important messages, essential guides to the symbolic language that speaks most directly to your innermost being. The symbols that captivate you, that haunt you, that appear repeatedly in your aesthetic choices. These are messengers from your unconscious, guiding you toward greater self-understanding. They reveal the archetypes most active in your personal journey, the energies seeking expression in your life, the aspects of yourself calling for integration. And here's where it gets truly fascinating, where Jung's insight becomes absolutely revolutionary. The evolution of symbols in art history mirrors the evolution of consciousness itself, both collective and individual. Just as humanity moved from magical thinking to rational thought to integrative awareness, so too do we each follow this path in our personal development. The art that speaks to us often reflects our current psychological stage and points toward our next evolution. But most remarkably, these symbols don't just reflect our consciousness. They actively shape it, influence it, transform it. When early humans painted animals on cave walls, they weren't merely decorating or recording. They were creating a symbolic relationship with their world that fundamentally transformed their perception of reality itself. Share in the comments which historical period of art most powerfully calls to you, and what do you think this reveals about your current psychological development? And that brings us to one of the most profound aspects of symbolic art, how it reveals and expresses the shadow aspects of human nature. Section 4. The embodiment of shadow in art. Beneath the sunlit surface of human consciousness lies what Jung called the shadow, those aspects of ourselves we've disowned, repressed, denied, or never fully acknowledged. The forbidden desires, the rejected capabilities, the denied darkness, the unacknowledged power. And nowhere, is this shadow more powerfully confronted, more dramatically illuminated, more honestly expressed than in the realm of visual art. Art gives tangible form to our darkest fears. Art externalizes our hidden rage. Art makes visible our unacknowledged hungers. It transforms our inner demons into external images, so we might finally face them, understand them, integrate them. Picture Francisco Goya's haunting Saturn devouring his son, a father consuming his child in primal cannibalistic horror. Feel the raw terror of Hieronymus Bosch's hellscapes, teeming with grotesque manifestations of human sin, folly, and unchecked desire. Witness Francis Bacon's distorted human figures with their twisted flesh and silent screams. These aren't mere fantasies. These aren't simple nightmares. These aren't arbitrary creative choices. They're visual manifestations of the shadow we all carry within, the capacity for destruction, perversion, violence, and chaos that lurks beneath civilization's thin, fragile, carefully maintained veneer. Jung wrote with penetrating insight, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." Simple truth, profound implications, revolutionary understanding. This psychological truth reveals why we often feel such profound discomfort when confronting certain artworks. When we turn away from art that disturbs us, when we dismiss it as ugly or meaningless, when we refuse to engage with its challenging content, we're often turning away from parts of ourselves. Parts that demand recognition, parts that require acknowledgement, parts that insist on integration before true healing can occur. Consider your own experience with art that disturbs. Has a painting ever both repelled and fascinated you simultaneously? Have you found yourself unable to look away from an image that made you deeply uncomfortable? Perhaps Edvard Munch's The Scream, with its existential anguish, Louise Bourgeois' spider sculptures with their primal, maternal terror, Picasso's Guernica with its fragmented violence. That ambivalent response, the push and pull of attraction and revulsion, signals a direct encounter with your own shadow content, your unconscious recognizing itself in external form, your psyche meeting aspects of itself it has long denied or rejected. 3 crucial insights emerge when we understand shadow symbolism in art. First, recognizing darkness doesn't mean surrendering to it. Acknowledging violence doesn't make us violent. Understanding our capacity for destruction doesn't mean we must destroy. The artist who depicts horror isn't necessarily horrible. They're courageously acknowledging horror as a human potential that requires conscious relationship rather than unconscious acting out. Second, the shadow contains not only negative qualities but positive ones, strengths, talents, energies, and capabilities we've denied in ourselves. The savage power in a painting of a storm might represent vitality you've suppressed in the name of being nice. The aggressive energy in abstract expressionist work might reflect assertiveness you need to claim. The dark sexuality in certain artwork might point to life force you've rejected. Third, art that reveals collective shadow elements often precedes social transformation. The disturbing surrealist works that emerged between world wars weren't just aesthetic experiments, they were psychological warnings about the fragmentation of European society, prophetic visions of the chaos to come, unconscious preparations for necessary cultural transformation. The power of shadow art isn't in making darkness beautiful, it's in making darkness visible, conscious, integrated. When we see our inner demons externalized in paint, stone, or photographic image, when we encounter them in symbolic rather than literal form, we can begin the work of integration rather than repression. This is why cultures throughout history have created visual representations of their fears, not to worship darkness, but to bring it into relationship with consciousness. Not to glorify evil, but to acknowledge its reality and transform its energy. Not to remain stuck in shadow, but to use shadow awareness as fuel for growth and wholeness. Think of the gargoyles on Gothic cathedrals, grotesque faces and monstrous forms placed on sacred buildings not to frighten, but to acknowledge that even in the most holy spaces, we must recognize and guard against the shadow elements of human nature. These aren't decorations, they're psychological teachings carved in stone. I invite you now to recall a specific work of art that disturbed you deeply, yet somehow held your gaze, that you couldn't simply dismiss, ignore, or forget. What qualities in that piece most unsettled you? What emotions arose as you viewed it? What physical sensations did you notice in your body? Your answers offer profound insight into the specific nature of your own shadow. The things that most disturb us in art often point directly to aspects of ourselves we most need to acknowledge, understand, and integrate. This recognition is the first step toward wholeness. As Jung discovered through decades of clinical work and personal exploration, integrating the shadow doesn't darken the personality, it illuminates it. It brings vital energy and authentic power that was previously locked in unconscious struggle. The goal isn't to become our shadow, but to know our shadow, to acknowledge its reality, to understand its message, to transform its energy into conscious, creative, life-serving expression. Now I'd like to hear from you. Share in the comments a piece of art that both attracted and disturbed you. What do you think it revealed about your own hidden depths? What aspect of your shadow might it have been trying to show you? But here's where it gets even more intriguing, because the shadow is only one aspect of the psyche seeking expression through art. There are other profound archetypal energies at work, particularly the fascinating interplay between masculine and feminine forces that Jung called the Anima and Animus. Section 5. Anima and Animus. The dance of feminine and masculine in art. Within each woman lives an inner masculine energy, the Animus. Within each man dwells a feminine counterpart, the Anima. These inner opposites seek expression, completion, and sacred integration throughout our lives, often emerging with particular power and breathtaking beauty in visual art. The Anima and Animus represent one of Jung's most profound discoveries, that psychologically, spiritually, and archetypally, we are not single-gendered beings. We contain within us the energetic qualities of both masculine and feminine, regardless of our biological sex, our cultural conditioning, or our conscious self-identification. These inner opposites aren't just present, they actively seek expression, desperately need recognition, and continuously call for integration in what Jung called the sacred marriage, the mystical union, the alchemical wedding of masculine and feminine energies within the individual psyche. Visual art offers us the most direct, visceral, and emotionally powerful representations of this psychological truth. In the history of art, we find countless expressions of both the productive tension and the potential harmony between these complementary forces. Three essential principles govern this archetypal dance. First, authentic wholeness requires both energies. Second, creative power emerges from their integration. Third, the greatest art embodies this sacred marriage of opposites. Look at the fluid, sensual, organic curves of Georgia O'Keeffe's flower paintings. Feminine energy made visible through intimate space, nurturing roundness, receptive depth, and mysterious interior landscapes. Then contrast these with the bold, geometric, assertive structures of Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture, masculine principles embodied in vertical thrust, rational organization, decisive angles, and conquest of space. Yet look more closely and you'll discover something profound. O'Keeffe's work contains precision and assertive strength, while Wright's buildings curve and flow with organic grace. The most compelling art always integrates both energies, just as the most complete human personality embraces both masculine and feminine aspects, without internal conflict or external pretense. The ancient Chinese understood this interplay with remarkable clarity in their concept of yin and yang, complementary forces that together create wholeness, balance, harmony, and creative power. In traditional Chinese art, this balance is essential, with empty space, yin being as important as the brushstroke. Yang, neither dominates, both contribute, each serves the whole. Jung discovered that dreams and art often present these inner opposites in personified form, actual figures that represent these energies seeking conscious relationship and eventual integration. For men, the anima frequently appears as a mysterious female figure, the enigmatic woman, the divine goddess, the earthy lover, the inspirational muse, the wise woman, or the terrible mother. We see these anima representations throughout art history, from the great mother goddesses of ancient cultures to the Madonna of Renaissance painting, to the mysterious feminine presences in symbolist art, to the powerful female figures in contemporary work. For women, the animus often takes shape as a masculine figure of action, wisdom, or spiritual authority, the hero, the sage, the ruler, the warrior, the lover, the spiritual guide, or the divine father. These animus forms appear repeatedly in art created by women, from the powerful male figures in Frida Kahlo's paintings to the archetypal masculine energies in the sculptures of Louise Bourgeois, to the assertive geometric forms in the abstract work of many contemporary female artists. The anima development in men, according to Jung's detailed observations, progresses through 4 distinct stages, each represented by specific feminine archetypes in art and literature. First is Eve, the purely biological woman, representing undifferentiated feminine energy, instinctual connection, and natural sexuality. In art, we see this in primitive fertility goddesses, raw depictions of feminine power, and works that celebrate the earthy, embodied aspects of the feminine. Second comes Helen of Troy, the romantic and aesthetic ideal, represented in art through idealized feminine beauty from classical sculptures to pre-Raphaelite paintings to contemporary images of feminine perfection and romantic longing. Third is Mary, the spiritual mother who elevates love to sacred devotion, seen in countless Madonna paintings, representations of divine feminine wisdom, and artworks that express nurturing, compassion, and unconditional love. Fourth is Sophia, the embodiment of transcendent wisdom and meaning, represented in art as the divine feminine principle in mandalas, wisdom goddesses, mystical feminine figures, and abstract representations of integrated consciousness and spiritual realization. Similarly, the animus development in women progresses through stages of masculine energy, from pure physical power to romantic attraction to intellectual capability, and finally, to spiritual wisdom and meaning, all visible in the evolution of masculine imagery in art created by women throughout history. Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa has captivated viewers for centuries, partially because of how perfectly it embodies this integration of masculine and feminine principles. The subject's enigmatic smile blends receptive feminine mystery with assertive masculine knowledge, creating a visual representation of psychological wholeness that resonates across time, culture, and individual difference. When Jung analyzed the artwork of his patients, he discovered that the anima and animus appear spontaneously as people progress in their psychological development. A man working through anima integration might unconsciously begin incorporating more flowing, organic, receptive forms into his artwork. A woman integrating her animus might introduce more structural, directional, assertive elements into her creative expression. Contemporary artist Frida Kahlo explored her own animus through self-portraits where she appears with masculine attributes: short hair, suits, strong facial features, direct gaze, and assertive presence. Through her art, she engaged in visual dialogue with the masculine aspects of her psyche, a revolutionary act of psychological integration in her era and cultural context. The tension between anima and animus energies creates the dynamic power we feel in great art. Consider the work of tantric artists in both Hindu and Buddhist traditions, where masculine and feminine deities embrace in cosmic union. These aren't merely religious illustrations, but profound symbolic representations of the psychological union Jung described as the goal of individuation, the sacred marriage within the individual psyche. As you view art moving forward, notice which pieces awaken feelings of complementary wholeness within you. A painting or sculpture might embody qualities you've neglected, rejected, or never fully developed in yourself. Strength, if you've focused exclusively on gentleness; vulnerability, if you've prioritized only power; intuition, if you've relied solely on logic; structure, if you've emphasized only flow. The art that most powerfully moves us often carries the energies we most need for our own psychological integration, our next stage of development, our movement toward greater wholeness and authentic self-expression. When a work of art resonates with you deeply, ask yourself, which aspect of my soul feels awakened by this image, the masculine or the feminine? What quality within me responds to this image with recognition, longing, or a sense of coming home? What does this artwork reveal about the next stage of my own integration? Your answers provide a window into your current psychological development and point toward the next step in your journey toward wholeness, the integration of these complementary energies into a unified self that can express the full range of human qualities without internal conflict, external pretense, or psychological limitation. The ultimate goal isn't to become more masculine or more feminine, but to integrate these complementary energies into a unified self. that can access and express whatever qualities each situation requires: strength or gentleness, assertion or receptivity, structure or flow, logic or intuition, all in service of authentic self-expression and meaningful contribution to the world. The greatest art shows us this possibility, not as an abstract concept, but as a living reality we can feel in our bodies, recognize in our souls, and work toward in our own creative expressions and life choices. In the next section, we'll explore another powerful Jungian symbol that appears repeatedly in art across cultures and time: the mandala, the sacred circle that represents the integrated self and the journey towards psychological wholeness. At the heart of Jung's understanding of symbolic art lies the mandala, the sacred circle, the cosmic wheel, the divine geometry that represents wholeness, integration, and the self. This ancient symbol appears across cultures and throughout art history, whispering to us of our potential for psychological completion and spiritual realization. I sketched every morning in a notebook a small circular drawing. Jung wrote of his own transformative practice, a mandala, which seemed to correspond to my inner situation at the time. Simple practice, profound results, revolutionary discovery. For Jung, these spontaneous circular images weren't mere aesthetic exercises. They were visual manifestations of his psyche seeking balance, order, and wholeness during a period of intense psychological upheaval and spiritual crisis. The word mandala comes from Sanskrit, meaning circle or center, but its psychological significance extends far beyond its simple geometric form. Jung discovered the mandala as a universal symbol of the self, the archetype of wholeness, the regulating center of the psyche, the organizing principle that brings order to psychological chaos. Three essential truths about mandalas emerge from Jung's work. First, mandalas appear spontaneously during times of psychological transition. Second, they have a stabilizing and healing effect on the psyche. Third, they represent the self, the totality of the personality, seeking conscious recognition and integration. In the midst of his own profound psychological crisis following his break with Freud, Jung began drawing mandalas daily, finding that these circular images had a remarkably stabilizing and healing effect on his psyche. The very act of creating circular, centered forms seemed to restore psychological equilibrium and provide a sense of inner order during outer chaos. What makes this discovery so remarkable is that Jung came to understand the mandala's significance through his own direct experience before encountering the rich traditions of mandala creation in Eastern spiritual practices. Only later did he recognize the striking parallels between his spontaneous creations and the ancient sacred art of Tibet, India, and other cultures, confirming his hypothesis about universal archetypal patterns. The mandala takes countless forms across world cultures: the intricate sand paintings of Tibetan Buddhism, the rose windows of Gothic cathedrals, Native American medicine wheels, Hindu yantras, Celtic stone circles, the geometric patterns of Islamic art, the halos surrounding sacred figures in religious paintings, and even the zodiac, the circle of celestial symbols that organizes the heavens themselves. In modern and contemporary art, mandala forms continue to emerge, often without the artist's conscious awareness of their psychological significance. Wassily Kandinsky's circular compositions, Hilma af Klint's mystical geometric paintings, the concentric circles of target paintings by Jasper Johns, the radial symmetries in the work of many contemporary artists all echo the mandala's fundamental structure and psychological function. What makes the mandala so psychologically powerful is its mathematical perfection combined with infinite variation. The circle itself represents totality: no beginning or end, no divisions or fragmentation, simply wholeness. Yet within this perfect form, intricate patterns create dynamic tension and balance, mirroring the complex unity of the integrated psyche. Jung identified four key psychological aspects of the mandala's symbolic power. First, the mandala creates a protected inner space, a temenos or sacred enclosure that shields the psyche from dissolution, fragmentation, or chaos. In times of psychological distress, creating or contemplating mandalas can have a containing, stabilizing, and deeply reassuring effect. Second, the mandala typically features a clear center point, representing the self as the central organizing principle of the psyche. All elements within the circle relate to this center, just as all aspects of the personality ideally relate to the self, the archetype of wholeness and integration. Third, mandalas often incorporate quaternary structures, patterns of four, representing the psychological functions Jung identified: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. The balance and integration of these four functions constitutes psychological wholeness and optimal human functioning. Fourth, mandalas frequently include symbolic opposites in dynamic balance: light and dark, male and female, active and passive, spiritual and material, representing the integration of opposing forces within the psyche rather than their continued conflict or mutual exclusion. When we create or contemplate mandalas, something profound happens within us. The fragmented aspects of our personality, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, masculine and feminine, thinking and feeling, begin to arrange themselves around a coherent center. We experience, if only momentarily, the possibility of our own wholeness, integration, and psychological completion. Look at how Hindu and Buddhist traditions have used mandalas as meditative tools for centuries. By focusing on these symbolic representations of the cosmos, practitioners are actually contemplating the structure of their own psyches, bringing order to inner chaos, clarity to confusion, and integration to fragmentation. A Tibetan monk spending days creating an intricate sand mandala is engaged in both spiritual practice and profound psychological work, externalizing the process of inner integration through sacred artistic creation. Jung observed that mandalas often appear spontaneously at crucial moments in the individuation process, particularly during periods of psychic turmoil, major life transitions, or spiritual awakening. A patient might dream of circular forms, spontaneously draw circular patterns, or become unusually attracted to circular objects in their environment without knowing why. These manifestations signal the self-archetype becoming active in the psyche, initiating a new phase of integration and psychological development. In art therapy, the creation of mandalas has proven remarkably effective for establishing psychological equilibrium and facilitating healing. Even children and adults with no artistic training instinctively create balanced circular designs when given simple drawing tools and the invitation to express their inner state. The resulting images often reveal striking psychological information: the distribution of colors, the balance of elements, the clarity or confusion of the center, the presence or absence of containing boundaries all provide windows into the creator's psychological state and therapeutic needs. Consider this powerful personal practice. Take a blank piece of paper and draw a large circle. Without planning, analyzing, or judging, begin to fill the circle with colors, patterns, or images that intuitively feel right. Don't think, just create. Don't analyze, just express. Don't judge, just allow your hand to move and your unconscious to speak. When complete, observe your mandala with curiosity and compassion. Notice its balance, its energy, its unique characteristics. It contains valuable information about your current psychological state, your inner conflicts and potentials, your movement toward or away from wholeness. Try this practice regularly, perhaps once a week, and save your mandalas with dates. Over time, you'll likely discover a visual story unfolding, a narrative of your psyche's evolution that was occurring beneath conscious awareness. You may see patterns of color, recurring symbols, evolving balance, or increasing complexity that reflects your psychological development. The mandala reminds us that wholeness isn't about eliminating parts of ourselves, but about bringing them into right relationship. Every element has its place within the sacred circle of the self: the shadow, the anima, animus, the persona. All are necessary components of the complete psyche. None need be rejected. All can be integrated. As we examine the evolution of art through history, we can see how mandalas and mandala-like forms appear during periods of cultural transformation and collective psychological integration. From the great rose windows that emerged during the spiritual flowering of medieval Europe, to the circular abstractions that appeared in modern art during the profound psychological shifts of the early 20th century, these symbols arise when the collective psyche seeks new wholeness, balance, and integration. In your own life journey, notice when circular imagery begins to appear in your dreams, your doodles, or captures your attention in the world around you. The mandala may be emerging as your guide to a new level of integration, inviting you toward greater wholeness, deeper self-understanding, and more authentic self-expression. The appearance of the mandala in our individual and collective art leads us naturally to our next exploration: how modern art, particularly abstract art, represents a revolutionary new chapter in humanity's visual dialogue with the unconscious. And this brings us to Jung's most astonishing discovery about modern art. Section 7. Symbols in Modern Art. The Cry of the Collective Unconscious. Modern and contemporary art, with its seeming break from traditional symbolism, actually represents a profound evolution in our visual dialogue with the unconscious. Far from abandoning symbols, artists like Picasso, Pollock, and Rothko were discovering new ways to express ancient archetypal energies, creating a revolutionary visual language for the collective unconscious in a rapidly changing world. When traditional religious frameworks began to fragment, when cultural certainties started dissolving, when the old symbolic systems could no longer contain the modern experience, artists turned inward. They mined the depths of the psyche for new forms of expression. They accessed archetypal content directly. They bypassed conventional imagery to reach universal truths. What emerged wasn't arbitrary chaos. What emerged wasn't meaningless decoration. What emerged wasn't the death of symbolism. What emerged was a direct manifestation of archetypal content seeking contemporary form, the collective unconscious speaking through a new visual vocabulary, expressing eternal patterns in revolutionary ways, adapting ancient wisdom to modern consciousness. This seismic shift in artistic expression coincided directly with Jung's development of analytical psychology. Both were responses to the same profound changes in human consciousness. Just as Jung discovered that the psyche contains universal patterns beneath personal experience, modern artists revealed that authentic visual expression could access universal meanings beneath conventional forms. Consider three revolutionary approaches to modern art through the lens of Jung's understanding of the unconscious. First, examine the Cubist revolution initiated by Picasso and Braque. Their fragmentation of form wasn't simply a stylistic innovation, but a visual representation of the modern psyche's fragmented condition. When Picasso painted Les Demoiselles d'Avignon with its shattered perspectives and mask-like faces, he was giving visual form to the psyche's encounter with its own primitive shadow elements. The painting caused shock, outrage, confusion, not just because it broke artistic conventions, but because it revealed psychological content the conscious mind preferred to keep hidden, denied, or projected onto others. The African mask influences weren't exotic decoration. They were the return of the repressed primitive, the shadow of European civilization, the archetypal energies Western culture had tried to eliminate. As Jung wrote about such revealing art, the psychological condition of the modern man is reflected most clearly in modern art, which is concerned with the dismemberment of culture and the dissolution of the traditional spirit. But the Cubists weren't destroying form. They were showing the psyche's need to break conventional perceptions to access deeper truth, fragmented reality to reveal multiple perspectives, shattered surfaces to reach essential structures. Second, consider Jackson Pollock's drip paintings. Chaotic, energetic, seemingly random webs of color and line created through spontaneous physical movement. Jung would recognize in these works the primordial patterns of psychic energy, the raw life force that precedes ordered consciousness, the dynamic flow of libido-seeking expression. Pollock himself described his process as energy and motion made visible. These paintings speak directly to our pre-verbal understanding of vitality and movement, activating archetypal patterns related to chaos and cosmos, emergence and dissolution, the dynamic dance of creative and destructive forces that underlies all existence. Pollock's famous statement that he was in the painting reveals the dissolution of ego boundaries that Jung identified as essential for accessing the collective unconscious. The resulting artworks aren't random splashes, but visual manifestations of psychic patterns accessible only when conscious control is partially surrendered, when the ego steps aside, when deeper forces are allowed to express themselves. Third, examine Mark Rothko's luminous color fields, rectangular forms of vibrating color that create an almost mystical viewing experience. These aren't simply decorative arrangements, but modern-day equivalents of stained glass windows, inviting contemplation of the numinous and transcendent. Rothko himself insisted his work wasn't abstract, but dealt with basic human emotions: tragedy, ecstasy, doom. Jung would recognize in Rothko's radiant rectangles what he called the experience of the numinous, the encounter with archetypal energies that transcend ordinary consciousness. The powerful emotional responses these paintings evoke come not from their formal properties alone, but from their activation of archetypal patterns related to transcendence, liminality, and the threshold between worlds. The Surrealists explicitly acknowledged their debt to Jung and Freud, creating visual art that brought dream imagery into waking consciousness. Salvador Dali's melting clocks and bizarre landscapes aren't mere fantasies, but visualizations of how time and space operate in the unconscious mind. Max Ernst's collages and frottage techniques were designed to bypass conscious control and allow unconscious material to emerge, a visual form of Jung's active imagination. Even the seemingly cold geometry of minimalist art connects to ancient symbolic traditions. The perfect cubes of Donald Judd or the symmetrical arrangements of Agnes Martin's grids echo the sacred geometry that humans have used for millennia to create order from chaos, meaning from randomness, cosmos from chaos. These artists stripped away conventional imagery to reveal essential archetypal structures, the visual equivalent of Jung's quest to identify the core patterns of the psyche beneath cultural variations. What makes modern art particularly revealing from a Jungian perspective is how it often predicted cultural transformation before it occurred in society. Abstract expressionism, with its emphasis on freedom and individual expression, emerged just before the social revolutions of the 1960s. The fragmented perspectives of Cubism appeared as traditional European society was fracturing prior to World War I. The Surrealists' exploration of dream imagery preceded the broad cultural interest in dreams and the unconscious that emerged in the latter half of the 20th century. Jung recognized this prophetic quality of art, noting that artists often serve as unconscious seismographs, registering shifts in the collective psyche before they become conscious. The artist is the unwitting mouthpiece of the psychic secrets of his time, and is so because in his works he goes beyond what he has set out to say consciously. Perhaps the most powerful example of this phenomenon was the emergence of abstract art itself, the complete abandonment of representational imagery that occurred almost simultaneously across Europe in the early 1900s. Artists like Kandinsky, Malevich, and Mondrian, working independently in different countries, all moved toward abstraction during the same period, a collective shift that Jung would recognize as the emergence of a new archetypal constellation in the collective unconscious. What Jung discovered about abstract art in particular was its unique capacity to express psychological content that cannot be contained in conventional imagery. Some aspects of the psyche, particularly those related to spiritual or transcendent experience, resist concrete representation. Abstract art creates a visual language for these ineffable dimensions of experience, just as Jung's concept of archetypes provides a psychological language for patterns that transcend personal experience. This understanding completely transforms how we view abstract art. Rather than seeing it as obscure, meaningless, or merely decorative, we can recognize it as a sophisticated symbolic language addressing aspects of experience that conventional imagery cannot reach. The non-representational forms of abstract art speak directly to our capacity for symbolic thinking, activating archetypal patterns without tying them to specific cultural forms. As you encounter modern and contemporary art, try this Jungian approach. Rather than asking, "What does this represent?" or "What does this mean?" ask, "How does this affect me?" Notice the physical, emotional, and energetic responses the work evokes. These responses aren't subjective distractions from the real meaning of the art. They are the direct communication between the archetypal content in the artwork and the corresponding archetypal patterns in your own psyche. The revolutionary power of modern art lies in its creation of new symbolic forms for eternal archetypal content, allowing ancient patterns to speak in contemporary language, universal truths to express themselves in revolutionary forms, timeless wisdom to address modern concerns. This evolution continues in contemporary art, where digital media, installation, performance, and mixed media create ever more complex symbolic languages for the unconscious. Virtual reality, interactive installations, and AI-generated imagery open new frontiers for archetypal expression, creating possibilities Jung could hardly have imagined, yet entirely consistent with his understanding of the psyche's need for symbolic expression. But what makes this understanding of modern art so vital is its revelatory power for understanding the individuation process, the journey towards psychological wholeness that stands at the center of Jung's psychology. And that brings us to the most astonishing discovery of all. Section 8. Individuation. Art as the mirror of the soul. What Jung discovered about abstract art was absolutely revolutionary. These seemingly modern visual experiments were actually perfect expressions of the individuation process, the journey towards psychological wholeness that is the central task of human development, the ultimate goal of psychological growth, and the deepest meaning of human existence. Through art, we can witness this profound inner journey. Through art, we can facilitate this transformative process. Through art, we can understand the deepest movements of the human soul. Individuation involves integrating the fragmented aspects of the psyche, conscious and unconscious, persona and shadow, anima and animus, thinking and feeling, into a unified, authentic, fully realized self. This complex psychological process often defies rational explanation, transcends verbal description, and resists conventional understanding, which is precisely why symbolic art becomes such a powerful medium for its expression. The decisive question for man is, Jung wrote with characteristic insight, is he related to something infinite or not? Abstract art, with its non-representational forms and emphasis on direct emotional experience, creates a visual language for this relationship with the infinite. It bypasses the rational mind to speak directly to the deeper layers of the psyche. It transcends cultural conditioning to touch universal patterns. It connects individual experience to cosmic meaning. The individuation journey consists of several key stages, each with its own symbolic manifestation in art, its own archetypal content, its own transformative challenges and opportunities. Stage 1 begins with the encounter with the shadow, those disowned aspects of ourselves we've rejected, repressed, or denied. In art, shadow integration often appears as the incorporation of darker elements, chaotic forms, or disturbing imagery that gradually becomes balanced with more ordered or luminous elements. Consider Francisco Goya's extraordinary progression from court painter creating elegant portraits to his late black paintings that confronted the shadow directly, a visual record of his own psychological development, his own encounter with darkness, his own journey toward integration and wholeness. At this stage, creating art often involves confronting resistance, fear, shame, or revulsion as shadow content emerges. The resulting images may be uncomfortable, disturbing, or even frightening, yet they contain essential energy for the individuation process. Jung noted that there is no light without shadow and no psychic wholeness without imperfection. Stage 2 involves the encounter with the soul image, the anima in men, the animus in women. In art, this often appears as an integration of masculine and feminine elements, a dialogue between structure and flow, a balance between assertion and receptivity. We see this beautifully demonstrated in the work of Wassily Kandinsky, whose early abstract paintings balance geometric masculine forms with flowing feminine shapes and colors in a visual representation of psychological integration. As his work evolved, these elements became increasingly harmonized, suggesting his own psychological development. When artists reach this stage, their work often takes on a numinous, soulful quality that transcends technical skill. The soul image infuses the work with a mysterious aliveness that viewers can sense intuitively. As Jung observed, the anima is the archetype of life itself, and art infused with this energy carries a vitality that purely technical mastery cannot achieve. Stage 3 encompasses the encounter with the self, the archetype of wholeness, the regulating center of the entire psyche, the organizing principle that brings order to psychological chaos. In art, this often manifests through mandala-like formations, integrated compositions that balance opposing elements, or images that suggest transcendence while remaining grounded. The luminous abstract paintings of Agnes Pelton, with their balance of cosmic and earthly elements, geometric structure and organic flow, celestial inspiration and embodied reality, offer beautiful examples of self-imagery in modern art. At this advanced stage of individuation, an artist's work often achieves a quality of integrated wholeness that transcends style, technique, or cultural context, what Jung might call a living symbol that unifies conscious and unconscious content into a meaningful whole. The resulting artworks carry a sense of resolution and completion that viewers experience as deeply satisfying, profoundly moving, even healing. Consider Wassily Kandinsky's evolution. He created some of the first abstract paintings in Western art, deliberately designing his vibrant compositions to evoke spiritual and emotional responses. He understood that abstract forms could communicate inner truths that realistic depictions could never reach. As he developed as both an artist and a human being, his work increasingly incorporated the symbolism of individuation, moving from chaotic, shadow-filled early abstractions to more integrated mandala-like compositions that suggest the emergence of the self. Or examine Louise Bourgeois, whose sculptural work emerged directly from her courageous efforts to heal childhood trauma through artistic expression. Her spider sculptures, cell installations, and textile works externalized inner psychological states, making visible the invisible process of integration and healing. Over her remarkably long career, we can trace the individuation process as her work evolved from expressions of psychological wounding to powerful symbols of integration, wisdom, and spiritual wholeness. Mark Rothko's evolution as an artist similarly traces a profound individuation journey. His early surrealist works, filled with mythological and primordial imagery, represent the encounter with the collective unconscious. His transition to color-field paintings, luminous rectangles of color floating in mysterious relationship, can be understood as visual expressions of the self-archetype emerging into consciousness, creating order, relationship, and transcendent meaning from psychological chaos. This is why creating art can be so profoundly transformative. When we paint, sculpt, draw, or engage in any form of visual expression, we're not just making objects. We're exteriorizing our inner landscape, bringing unconscious content into relationship with consciousness, facilitating dialogue between different aspects of the psyche. Each artwork becomes a step on the path of individuation, a visual record of our psychological development, a bridge between who we were and who we're becoming. The contemporary practice of art therapy builds directly on this understanding. By creating visual images in a therapeutic context, individuals access symbolic material from their unconscious, often revealing insights that verbal therapy alone couldn't reach. The art therapist, trained in Jungian principles, helps the client recognize the symbolic content of their creations and integrate these insights into conscious awareness and daily life. Jung observed that patients in analysis would spontaneously create images that paralleled alchemical symbols, ancient representations of the transformation of base matter into gold that Jung recognized as metaphors for psychological transformation. Without any knowledge of alchemy, modern individuals would produce images of conjunction, union of opposites, nigredo, the dark night of the soul, albedo, dawning awareness, and rubedo, the reddening or integration of passion and spirit, the same symbolic stages alchemists had documented centuries earlier. This phenomenon continues today. People with no knowledge of Jung's theories often create artwork that perfectly illustrates their current stage of individuation. A person working through shadow material might create dark, chaotic images. Someone encountering their anima or animus might produce images of the opposite gender or symbolic representations of internal dialogue. A person approaching self-integration often creates mandala-like images or compositions that balance opposing elements in harmonious relationship. Think about your own creative expressions, however modest they might seem. Even simple doodles, intuitive color choices, or spontaneous arrangements of objects can reveal aspects of your psyche seeking integration. The patterns you're naturally drawn to create, the colors that feel essential to your composition, the balance or imbalance of elements. These aren't arbitrary aesthetic choices, but meaningful expressions of your individuation process. Try this revelatory practice. Set aside 20 minutes to create an image without planning, analyzing, or judging. Use whatever materials feel right. Colored pencils, paint, collage, digital tools, even simple arrangements of natural objects. Begin by taking a few deep breaths and setting the intention to allow unconscious material to emerge. Then create freely, without censoring or analyzing. Don't think, just express. Don't judge, just allow. When complete, observe your creation with curious detachment and compassionate interest. What does it reveal about your current psychological state? What aspects of yourself might be seeking integration? What conflicts need resolution? What potentials are trying to emerge? What next step in your individuation does it suggest? Have you ever created art that surprised you with its content, emotional impact, or symbolic meaning? Perhaps a symbol emerged that you didn't consciously plan, or a color combination evoked unexpected feelings, or an image appeared that seemed to come from somewhere beyond your personal experience. These accidents are often the unconscious breaking through with important symbolic content, messages from deeper parts of the psyche seeking conscious integration and meaningful expression. As Jung wrote with profound insight, the psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. Creating art makes inner situations conscious, allowing us to engage with them directly rather than encountering them as external events, relationship conflicts, or life circumstances beyond our control. This is the profound gift of art as a tool for individuation. It allows us to participate consciously in our own psychological development, to engage actively with our own transformation, to become partners with the unconscious in the great work of becoming whole. Share in the comments a time when creating art revealed something unexpected about yourself. What emerged that surprised you, and how did it contribute to your self-understanding? What did you learn about your own individuation process through creative expression? Now that we've explored how art reflects and facilitates the individuation process, let's examine practical ways to apply Jung's insights to transform your own experience of art, both as viewer and creator. But first, there's something else you need to understand. Something that will revolutionize how you see every piece of art you encounter from this moment forward. Section 9. Practical application. Reading art through Jung's eyes. How might we practically apply Jung's profound insights to transform our experience of art, both viewing it and creating it? How can we develop our capacity to read the symbolic language of visual art with new depth, personal meaning, and transformative power? Here I'll share 7 concrete steps. 7 practical methods, 7 revolutionary approaches to engaging with art as a living dialogue with the unconscious. Step 1. Practice suspending intellectual analysis when you first encounter a work of art. Before cataloging technique, before identifying historical context, before making aesthetic judgments, simply notice your bodily and emotional response. Does your heart rate change? Do you feel drawn toward or repelled by the image? Do you experience warmth or coolness? Expansion or contraction, excitement or calm? These instinctual reactions are your unconscious recognizing itself in symbolic form, responding to archetypal content that resonates with your own psychological patterns. Your body knows before your mind understands. Your emotions respond before your intellect analyzes. Your unconscious recognizes symbolic content immediately, while your conscious mind may take minutes, hours, or even years to understand the meaning. Step 2. Pay careful, sustained attention to recurring patterns in your artistic preferences. Do you consistently gravitate toward certain colors? Are you repeatedly drawn to particular shapes, subjects, or emotional tones? Do you find yourself attracted to specific historical periods, artistic styles, or cultural expressions? These attractions aren't random aesthetic preferences, but reflect specific archetypal energies seeking expression in your life. The colors that call to you, the forms that fascinate you, the images that repeatedly capture your attention. These are messages from your unconscious about aspects of yourself that need development, integration, or conscious recognition. Red might represent passion or power you need to claim. Blue might reflect a need for peace or spiritual connection. Circular forms might suggest a movement toward wholeness. Angular shapes might indicate a need for more structure or clarity. Recurring images of water might point to emotional depths requiring attention. Step 3. When creating your own art, experiment fearlessly with active imagination. Jung's powerful technique for dialoguing with unconscious content. Begin with a simple shape, color, or mark. Then, allow your hand to move without conscious direction, watching with curious fascination what emerges. Don't plan. Don't control. Don't judge. Simply allow and observe. The resulting images often reveal symbolic material seeking conscious integration, aspects of yourself that have been waiting patiently for recognition, energies that need expression, conflicts that require resolution, potentials that want to manifest. This isn't about creating good art in any conventional sense. This is about creating authentic art, visual expressions that emerge directly from your unconscious, without the filtering, censoring, or distorting influence of conscious control. Step 4. Practice amplification, connecting personal symbols to their universal counterparts across cultures and throughout history. If you dream of or create an image of a tree, explore how trees function symbolically in mythology, religion, and art from different cultures. If spirals appear in your work, research their meaning in various traditions. This process contextualizes your personal experience within the collective, deepening your understanding of both your individual journey and humanity's shared symbolic heritage. You begin to see how your personal symbols participate in universal patterns, how your individual experience connects to archetypal content. A tree in your artwork isn't just your tree. It's connected to the world tree of Norse mythology, the tree of life in Kabbalah, the Bodhi tree of Buddhism, the tree of knowledge in Christianity. Your personal symbol carries the accumulated meaning of human experience across time and culture. Step 5. Maintain a visual journal where you can record images from dreams, spontaneous drawings, compelling artwork you've encountered, or any visual material that carries emotional charge for you. Date each entry and add brief notes about your emotional response or life circumstances. Over time, patterns and evolutions will emerge, offering insight into your psychological development and the archetypal forces most active in your life. You may notice recurring symbols, evolving color preferences, changing compositional patterns, or increasing complexity and integration. This journal becomes a visual record of your individuation process, a map of your psychological development that reveals patterns invisible to conscious awareness. You may discover that certain symbols appear during times of transition, that specific colors emerge during particular emotional states, or that your artistic expressions anticipate major life changes. Step 6. When visiting museums, galleries, or encountering art in any context, try this transformative practice. Stand before a work that draws you and ask, if this image were a dream of mine, what would it be telling me about my current psychological state? This question transforms art viewing from passive aesthetic consumption into active dialogue with the unconscious. Rather than simply appreciating beauty or analyzing technique, you engage with the artwork as a mirror, reflecting aspects of your own psyche back to you. A turbulent landscape might reflect inner emotional chaos needing attention. A serene portrait might suggest a need for inner peace or self-acceptance. Abstract forms might point to aspects of experience that resist verbal expression but require acknowledgement. Step 7. Remember that symbols often appear in compensatory relationship to conscious attitudes. If your life feels chaotic and overwhelming, you might be drawn to highly structured geometric art that offers psychological order. If you've been overly controlled and rigid, flowing organic forms might capture your attention as your psyche seeks balance. These attractions reveal what your psyche needs for balance, integration, and optimal functioning. The art that most powerfully moves you often carries exactly the energies you most need for your current stage of development. Pay attention to changes in your artistic preferences over time. What used to attract you but no longer does? What never interested you before but now captures your attention? These shifts reflect psychological development, changing needs, evolving consciousness. As you implement these practices consistently and with genuine curiosity, you'll discover that art becomes much more than aesthetic pleasure. It becomes a mirror reflecting your inner landscape, a map guiding your psychological development, and a bridge connecting your personal journey to humanity's collective symbolic heritage. Imagine the next time you walk into a museum with this new awareness. Rather than simply seeing objects on display, you'll recognize a vast conversation between humanity's collective unconscious and your own personal psyche, a dialogue conducted through the eloquent, ancient, eternally relevant language of visual symbols. You might notice that certain works seem to light up with significance, speaking directly to your current life situation with startling relevance. Others that previously seemed impenetrable might suddenly reveal their meaning as you recognize the archetypal patterns they contain. Still others might trigger unexpected emotional responses that point to unconscious material seeking integration. This heightened perception doesn't require special training in art history or academic psychology, only a willingness to look beyond the surface, to trust your intuitive responses, and to engage with art as a living expression of the psyche rather than merely an intellectual or aesthetic exercise. The symbols embedded in art are always speaking, always communicating, always offering guidance and insight. Through these practices, you learn to listen with new ears, to see with new eyes, to understand with new depth. You develop what Jung might call symbolic attitude, the capacity to recognize meaning in images, to dialogue with archetypal content, to use visual forms as bridges between conscious and unconscious aspects of experience. This transformation in how you relate to art inevitably transforms how you relate to yourself, to others, and to the world around you. You begin to recognize symbolic patterns everywhere, in nature, in relationships, in daily experiences, in the great movements of your life. You develop what we might call archetypal awareness, the ability to see universal patterns within personal experience, to recognize the mythic dimensions of ordinary life, to understand your individual journey as participation in humanity's eternal story. And this brings us to our final exploration, how this new understanding of symbolic art can guide us toward greater wholeness, deeper meaning, and more authentic self-expression. As we bring our exploration to a close, I want you to recognize something profound, something transformative, something that will change how you see art forever. The symbolic language of art represents humanity's longest continuous conversation, a dialogue between consciousness and the vast reaches of the unconscious that has continued uninterrupted for over 40,000 years. When you stand before a powerful work of art, you're not merely appreciating an object, admiring technique, or engaging in cultural activity. You're participating in this ancient exchange. The symbols speak, your unconscious responds, and in that resonance, something awakens within you, something timeless, something universal, something deeply personal. Jung understood three fundamental truths about symbols in art that completely transform how we experience them. First, symbols serve as bridges between dimensions of experience, between personal and collective, conscious and unconscious, temporal and eternal, individual and archetypal. They help us navigate the immense territory of the psyche that logical thought cannot map, verbal language cannot express, and rational analysis cannot fully comprehend. Second, authentic symbols are never static. They evolve, transform, and renew themselves through time and across cultures while maintaining their essential meaning and transformative power. The cross, the circle, the tree of life, the divine mother, the hero's journey. These endure not because they remain unchanged, but precisely because they continuously adapt while maintaining their archetypal essence. Third, symbols in art operate simultaneously on multiple levels of consciousness. A mandala isn't merely a pleasing circular design. It speaks simultaneously to our aesthetic sense, our logical mind, our emotional body, our spiritual intuition, and our deepest unconscious patterns. This multidimensional communication is what gives great art its power to move, transform, and heal. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus wrote with mysterious wisdom, "The most beautiful order is a heap of random sweepings." This paradoxical truth manifests perfectly in art's ability to create meaningful form from the apparent chaos of unconscious material. The artist gathers the random sweepings of the collective unconscious, fragments of dreams, archetypal images, symbolic patterns, and arranges them into beautiful order, creating stepping stones for our own journey toward wholeness, integration, and self-realization. What makes this understanding so vital now, in our hyper-rational, technology-driven, increasingly fragmented era? Precisely because we've become so disconnected from symbolic thinking, from the language of dreams and images, from the wisdom of the unconscious that once guided human civilizations for millennia. Art remains one of our most direct pathways back to this essential aspect of being human. In a world of data and algorithms, art offers symbols and meaning. In a culture of speed and efficiency, art provides depth and contemplation. In an age of artificial intelligence, art connects us to authentic intelligence, the wisdom of the psyche that cannot be programmed or replicated. As you move forward from today, I invite you to maintain a kind of double vision when encountering art, seeing both its outer form and sensing its inner significance, appreciating both its aesthetic qualities and recognizing its symbolic content, enjoying both its beauty and understanding its message. Notice which symbols seem to be speaking directly to you at this moment in your life journey. They are not appearing randomly, coincidentally, or without meaning. They are guides to aspects of your self-seeking integration, energies wanting recognition, potentials demanding expression. Remember Jung's profound insight that the psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. Art helps us recognize these inner situations before they manifest as external challenges, relationship conflicts, or life circumstances beyond our control. It offers us the chance to participate consciously in our own development, to engage actively with our own transformation, to become partners with the unconscious in the great work of individuation. The next time you create, whether you consider yourself an artist or not, allow the symbols to emerge freely. Trust the deep wisdom of your unconscious to produce exactly the images you need for your current psychological growth. Don't judge the results by conventional standards. Judge them by their authenticity, their symbolic content, their capacity to reveal hidden aspects of yourself. Consider this powerful, transformative practice. Once each week, create a small drawing, collage, or visual arrangement without planning or judgment. Date it and save it without analysis. After several months, review these spontaneous creations chronologically. You'll likely discover a visual story unfolding, a narrative of your psyche's evolution that was occurring beneath conscious awareness. You may see recurring symbols that point to persistent themes in your life. You might notice color progressions that reflect emotional development. You could observe increasing complexity and integration that mirrors your psychological growth. This practice connects you directly to the 40,000-year-old tradition of humans creating symbolic images to understand themselves, their world, and their place in the cosmic order. You become part of the eternal conversation between consciousness and the unconscious that defines our humanity. Finally, remember that in both creating and contemplating symbolic art, you're engaging in a form of active imagination that has the power to heal the modern fragmentation between thinking and feeling, between rationality and intuition, between conscious purpose and the deeper currents of the soul that guide authentic living. Art integration heals the split between mind and body, logic and creativity, individual and collective that characterizes so much modern suffering. Through symbolic engagement with visual images, we reconnect with aspects of ourselves and our world that technological civilization has taught us to ignore, dismiss, or forget. The symbols are always speaking, in the art we encounter, in the images we create, in the visual patterns that capture our attention, in the colors that call to us, in the forms that fascinate us. Through art, we learn to listen to this eternal conversation. Through listening, we learn to participate consciously in our own development. Through participation, we learn to become whole. What symbol in today's discussion most resonates with you? How might you bring that energy more fully into your life? What aspect of your own symbolic nature is calling for recognition and integration? Share your reflections in the comments below. Your insight might illuminate the path for others on this journey of symbolic discovery, artistic exploration, and psychological transformation. Your personal understanding contributes to our collective awakening to the profound wisdom embedded in humanity's eternal visual conversation with the unconscious. The conversation continues. The symbols still speak. The unconscious awaits your recognition. Will you listen? Will you participate? Will you join the eternal dialogue that connects you to the depths of your own soul and the vast wisdom of our shared human heritage? The choice, as always, is yours, but now you know the symbols are speaking. Art is calling. Your unconscious is waiting for your response.